Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning, Matt.
Morning, Matt.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today for our second Centennial Moment. As we are celebrating our century of possibilities, it seems prudent to honor a man and an endeavor that should be seen as the first possibility. This would be Guy Standifer and the GM Standifer Construction Corporation. Guy Standifer's organization operated 3 shipyards simultaneously in our area, but he was only a tenant of the port with one of them, the steel shipyard. It lasted not even 4 years, but it set the stage for the port's growth for decades afterwards. And first, a little background information to set the mood. Guy Menefee Standifer was born in Denison, Texas, and came to the Pacific Northwest in 1906. Prior to his involvement in the maritime industry, he was in the business of constructing lumber railroad lines, both in Texas and later in the Northwest. One of his early company projects was the building of a 100-mile section of the Portland-Spokane rail line from Spokane to Eyre, Washington in 1913. And just prior to coming to the Portland-Vancouver area, he had a small shipyard in Astoria that built schooners. When a major interest in that company was bought by a firm from Copenhagen, it allowed Standifer and his partner James Clarkson to leave and concentrate on a new shipyard on the Oregon Slough in the Kenton neighborhood of North Portland. And today this is where the rail bridge lands near the Expo building. This shipyard produced wooden cargo vessels, and after the U.S. entered World War I, Standifer procured a contract from the United States Shipping Board's Emergency Fleet Corporation for the construction of 10 wooden cargo vessels, 4 of which would be built at the shipyard on the Oregon Slough, and 6 at a new wood shipyard in Vancouver, and all of them were about 3,500 tons, deadweight tons. Standifer reorganized his company, the Standifer Clarkson Shipyard Incorporated, into the GM Standifer Construction Corporation to better meet the demands of this contract. James Clarkson would become the manager of the wood shipyard, which would be built on the site of the city's municipal dock. This site would eventually become the port's Terminal 1, currently the site of the Red Line at the Quay and Vancouver Landing. Standifer realized that the future belonged to steel cargo vessels. As with many in the maritime industry at that time, he recognized the need for a permanent American merchant marine, and he felt that steel vessels would help in achieving that goal. Standifer and his associates met with various officials of the Emergency Fleet Corporation, and a contract to build 10 9,500 deadweight ton cargo vessels of the Isherwood type was awarded on January 8, 1918. These 9,500 tonners would be some of the largest cargo vessels then being built in all of the shipyards in the Pacific Northwest. Standifer then turned to the Port of Vancouver commissioners for their help in securing a site for the steel shipyard. This would be a major turning point for our port, and at that time was almost 5 years old. The commissioners at that time, Georgia McCoy, Floyd Swan, and Walter Edwards, had to become proactive in land procurement instead of just overseeing the harbor. The port bought 52 acres located downriver but adjacent to the north-south line of the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railway. This purchase involved the issuing of bonds to raise the money necessary to purchase the land and to assist with the filling of the site to 30 feet above sea level. The Standifer Corporation would cover the other half of the filling cost. Construction of the shipyard began in February 1918, and so did the headaches. Shortages of materials, most importantly steel, housing, and labor, were encountered almost immediately. A camp was created to house the construction workers due to a lack of housing in Vancouver and in Portland. Until Standifer received additional funds from the Emergency Fleet Corporation for housing construction, some workers lived in the camp, while others were brought in by rail via a steam engine the Standifer Corporation paid for at its own expense. And just to give a number to this, at the time when the train service was discontinued on May 1, 1919, 900 workers were being transported each way per day to the steel shipyard alone. After funds were secured, the Liberty Hotel, now the site of Liberty Park on Mill Plain, was opened, which had 230 sleeping rooms and a capacity for 456 men. 10 small houses, or cottages as they called them, were also constructed, and many of these are still being occupied on Thompson and Simpson Avenues north of 20th Street, just east of our buildings 2001 and 2501. At the height of its operation, the Standifer Steel Shipyard employed between 3,500 and 4,000 workers, giving a payroll in $1920 of $500,000, or about $5.8 million in today's dollars. So this was a considerable sum and good employment for the citizens of Vancouver at that time. As I stated before, the construction on the steel shipyard began in February 1918, and the first ship was launched by the end of the year. This was the SS Coxit, which had its keel laid on August 3rd and was launched on December 31, 1918. A little less than 5 months to build one ship of this size was impressive. However, this wouldn't last. Construction times continued to expand, due mostly to the continuing plague of shortages. And shortages are truly what ultimately ended this possibility of the Standifer yards. Shortages of steel affected not only the construction of ships, but of the plant itself. There were shortages of adequate housing for the workers, shortages of lumber and other materials. But there was also a shortage of time. While the construction time of the Coxet was impressive, it was launched over a month after the armistice with Germany was signed, which ended World War I. Another shortage, and one which would plague the Port of Vancouver for some time, was a shortage of channel depth. The Vancouver River Improvement District, which was voted into existence by the City of Vancouver citizens in 1903 and gone by the end of that decade, did some initial dredging at their own expense, which deepened the channel to about 20 feet. The jetty at the head of Hayden Island helped a bit too, along with some dredging done by the Standifer Corporation in the port, which was used to fill the shipyard site. Still, at about 25 feet on a good day, the channel from the mouth of the Willamette to Vancouver Harbor was still too shallow to allow ships loaded with the steel vital to the Standifer yard to put in. These ships would have to dock in Portland, then the steel would be transferred either to barge, if the water was high enough and one was available, or rail car, again, if one was available, as there was a shortage of these as well. And everyone in this room knows that your costs start rising when you start transferring your materials from one mode of transport to another. Standifer's ability to compete with the other Northwest steel shipyards, not to mention California, was profoundly hindered by the channel. With the war over, the Emergency Fleet Corporation began to cancel contracts all around the country. Standifer had been in line for a second contract to build what would have been the 11th through the 15th Isherwood-class ships. They were also to receive additional money to expand the workers' housing developments. However, this contract was canceled and no additional housing funds were received. Standifer ended up constructing 20 steel-hulled vessels at their plant before closing. The original 10 ships for the Emergency Fleet Corporation, plus 5 more of the same class for private companies, and finally 5 tankers for private ownership. And these tankers were the same class as ones that were being built in Portland by the Northwest Bridge and Iron Company, where they didn't have to transfer their steel to rail. The steel shipyard ceased operations in 1921, and Guy Standifer went on to pursue other interests, both maritime and not, for many years, until passing away in Burlingame, California in May of '74 at the age of 87. But his legacy here at the port has endured. While denied a tradition of shipbuilding, the Port of Vancouver got a number of benefits and long-term tenants because of Standifer's time here. Washington Canners Cooperative secured a leasehold and constructed buildings on the northwest portion of the shipyard area in 1930. They remained a tenant until 1972 when their new owner, Diamond Fruit Company, closed the operation. However, almost immediately the site was leased by our friends at Northwest Packing, who continue to operate here. Some of the buildings of the shipyard were leased to a company called the McCall Payne Veneer Company beginning in 1924. They started out making crates and fruit baskets, but thought it might be a good idea to start manufacturing plywood. In 1933, they were bought out by Vancouver Plywood Company, who, along with their successor organization, Fort Vancouver Plywood, would remain at the port for over 50 years. We also got our first port manager from Standifer. Fred R. Brown had been the secretary of the Standifer Corporation. He represented a port in a deal with the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railway and the Pacific Continental Grain Company to build the grain elevator complex in 1934, which continues to operate and expand today. And finally, building on land made available by the construction of the grain elevator complex, our friends at Great Western Malting began their now 77 years here in 1935. All these tenants and a few others that time constraints prevent me from mentioning provided welcome jobs to the people of Clark County and Vancouver. But Standifer's most lasting legacy is the nudge he gave the port and the commission to become proactive in seeking out land to bring industry and commerce here to Clark County. Standifer was the foothold on land that today stretches to Terminal 5 and the Columbia Gateway, and will allow the Port of Vancouver to seek new possibilities in the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. That's fascinating.
I should mention that Matt is not only our records custodian, but our resident historian, and has done quite a bit of research, a significant amount of research as we've gone into our centennial, for everything from pictures to stories to background, and has done a great job.
He has.
making the past seem real for us.
He has, and I serve on the Centennial Committee, and I'm just awed at the amount of work and the dedication that you put into this. Everybody at the port works really, really hard. This is just an opportunity to say thank you to Matt. I really, really appreciate what you've done, and it's going to be a fun year, so thank you.
Matt, is some of that going to be in the Centennial book? Some of what you just read? A little bit? I'd like a copy of what you read. That's fascinating history.